Kלים Perik Chav Zayin, Mishnah Aleph, famous Perik called Habeged. If I had to choose one Mishnah in the whole Masechta, just one Mishnah, to know backwards, to know fully, to know every part of it, out of the whole Masechta, I would choose this one. This is, as far as I know, as far as I can see, the most fundamental Mishnah in the whole Masechta. The Mishnah starts off with the words, Habeged metame mishum chamisha shemus, and then it contrasts it with beged, and as you can see, the Mishnah is going to go on to describe beged, and then sok, and oir, and eitz, and klicheres. These are the basic kelim, except for matchas. The word beged, a garment. I'm sure we all know, we think we know what a beged is. However, we have to understand, not for this Mishnah, but generally speaking for the next few prokim, a beged is something, is material, it's fiber, fabric, which not necessarily has to be woven. Knitting, crocheting, and other forms of creating a mass of fibers to create a piece of cloth is called a beged. The material from which a beged has to be made, there's a machlokes in the Gemara where there's dafka tzeva or pishtin. Halacha is anything, doesn't have to be wool and linen dafka. And in fact, it seems that even man-made materials like nylon would also seem to be a beged, but this is not the point of this Mishnah. Let's just start the Mishnah. Habeged metame mishum chamisha shemus. There are 5 different ways a piece of cloth can be makabel tumah. 5 different statuses. The Mishnah is going to contrast this with a sock. A sock is also a type of beged, however not made from wool and linen. A sock is made from the hairs, noitzos shel izim, from the goats. It's a much coarser material from which sacks are made. And in this case, although a sock is similar to a beged, it's metame mishum arba. There are only 4 ways. One of the ways which beged is metame, sock isn't. Sock has 4 different ways. The Mishnah will carry on and explain all of these things. Ha'or, a piece of leather, which we've done, has got less ways. Mishum shloisha, there are only 3 different ways in which a piece of leather can be makabel tumah. Ha'etz mishum shnayim, wood, even less 2. V'chlicheres, an earthenware kli, mishum echad, only has 1 way. What the Mishnah is going to do now is tell us all these methods, but it's going to start with a lower one first, the klicheres with a 1, and then build up, back to the beged of 5 at the end of the Mishnah. So let's start the actual detail of this Mishnah. Kli cheres, says the Mishnah, metame mishum kli kibble. A kli cheres, an earthenware utensil, an earthenware kli, can only be makabel tumah in 1 way. If the kli cheres has a kibble, it has an inside, a toich, then it's a kli cheres, as we learned in the first 9 prokim, based to Perik Yud, at the beginning of this Masechta. It's then able to be makabel tumah. A kli cheres is not able to be makabel tumah al yedei medrus through the rules of Mishkav and Moshe, which you've also discussed. There's only 1 way kli cheres can be makabel tumah. That is, if it is a kli kibble, it's makabel tumah. That's basic. In fact, to be really pedantic, the real expression isn't a kli kibble. A cheres, the word kli kibble is normally used for wooden kelim. A kli cheres actually metame, even if it hasn't got a basin in which something can be, in which you can be makabel something, even if it's just got a toich, an inside which can be used. But the reason why kli kibble is used here, because we're trying to build up with a pattern to kli eitz, and therefore, and kli eitz definitely has to have the concept of a kibble, so we're using the same expression for kli cheres. So kli cheres, metame mishum kli kibble, 1 method only. If it's got a toich, it's makabel tumah. While we're on kli cheres, the Mishnah actually adds another line. Kol she'eino toich b'kli cheres eino acharayim. These words actually we've had before. We had at the beginning of the Masechta in Perik base Mishnah Gimel, the last words there. There are actually 4 or 5 different ways this expression can be understood. Bar Tanura here tells us a very simple way of looking at it, translating these words, and it is this simple. Although it's simple, it's actually, there are so many kashas on it, And that's why the other Mefarshim say something else, but we'll keep to the Baal Tanura's Pshat. Baal Tanura says very simply, a Kli Cheres which has a got a toich, kol she'ein a toich b'Kli Cheres, if it hasn't got a toich, ein loy achirayim, because a Kli Cheres can only be Mekabel Tumah from its inside. It cannot pick up Tumah from the outside. So if a sheretz touches the outside of the Kli Cheres, it cannot be Mekabel Tumah. So this is what the Mishnah is saying here, that the Kli Cheres cannot be Mekabel Tumah from the outside. The difficulty with this is that why express this in this particular way? It sounds like the Mishnah is saying, if it hasn't got a toich, then it cannot be Mekabel Tumah from the outside. But the truth is, a Kli Cheres cannot be Mekabel Tumah from the outside, whatever the circumstances, with a toich, without a toich. So this is the kash of the Rush. But that's how the Baal Tanura explains this line, and that's enough for us to be able to proceed with the next part of the Mishnah. Now we're going to build up, says the Mishnah. Moisav halov ha'etz. A kli eitz, a wooden kli, has another dimension, another way which can be Mekabel Tumah, apart from the kli kibble method of the Kli Cheres, which is, says the Mishnah, Moisav halov ha'etz shumetami mishum moishav. A Kli Cheres, of course, a Kli Eitz, of course, is Matami Mishum Kli Kibble, just like a Kli Cheres. If you have a wooden keli and it has a kibble, and the kibble is made to be Mekabel, then the Kli Eitz is Mekabel Tumah under the normal rule. The Kli Eitz Yeshlo Beis Kibble is Mekabel Tumah. Eitz, however, has another way it can be Mekabel Tumah, irrelevant of whether it has a kibble or not. If an Eitz is Ro'oi Lemishkav or Moishev, for instance a chair, then even though it hasn't got a kibble, because it's royal mishkav and moishav, it's mekabel tumas medrus, which means if a zov or a zova nidor yeredas put their weight on it, is mekabel tumah that way, and it's mekabel tumah through medrus, it's then mekabel tumah right across the board of tumas, across the whole spectrum, mekabel tumah anyway. So there are two ways in eitz can be mekabel tumah: either it is a kli kibble, or even if it's not, if it's royal mishkav and moishav, it's mekabel tumah medrus and all tumas through, just by being a keli which is royal mishkav and moishav. So that's two ways a kli eitz can be mekabel tumah. While we're on that subject, the Mishnah is going to add another little twist in the contrast between eitz and cheres. Going back to the basic rule of the kli kibble, which of course operates both in the kli cheres, both for kli cheres and for kli eitz, says the Mishnah. If you've got a tray without a rim, what we normally refer to as a kli poshut, in such a case, says the Mishnah, that's another difference between eitz and cheres. B'chli eitz tamea or b'chli cheres taira. This rule that a kli eitz has to have a kibble, the Rabbanon said, Tumad Rabbanon, in the case of a tray, in which one puts things on, and things are transported by the tray, it hasn't got a kibble because it hasn't got a rim. So midiraisa, it's not mekabel tumah. But the Rabbanon would gozer a tumah in such cases of pshute klei eitz, in cases of flat trays. We've had this before. They didn't do this with kli cheres, and therefore, because the Mishnah is really because the Mishnah is comparing eitz, kli eitz and kli cheres as far as kli kibble is concerned, the Mishnah is telling us another little contrast, that when it comes to pshutim, in certain cases there are tumah drabonons for kli eitz, but not with kli cheres. So we're up to the stage of the Mishnah where we've done two of them. We've done cheres with kli kibble and eitz with kli kibble and medrus. Now we're going to build up to the next stage. Moisab olav ha'or. An or has got an additional way. Shumatami mishum oyalim. Right, a piece of leather is matami mishum kli kibble. You have a piece of a keli made out of leather, a handbag, a pouch, a wallet. It's mekabel tumah under the normal rule. An or has to have a kli kibble. Similarly, an or can be mekabel tumah even if it hasn't got a kibble. If it's made the mishkav v'moshav, we've had this before. Flat pieces of leather, if they have a shear of 5 tefachim for 5 tefachim, or oil the mishkav v'moshav and mekabel tumah's medrus. But there's a third way, which doesn't apply to cheres and eitz. Shumatame mishum oihalim. This is something you may recognize from the Mishnah in B'mei Matlikin, where we have the expression there, Kol hayotzi min ha'eitz eino mitama tumas oihalim. What is tumas oihalim? The Torah is machadish that if you take a piece of leather and you create an oil, and you're mechaber this oil to the karka, so under the normal rule, something which is mechuber la karka is not able to be mekabel tumah. However, where the oil, a tent, literally, is mechuber la karka and made out of leather, it is mekabel tumah. If you have a mace inside that oil, then the oil is actually becomes tomei, because the pasuk says in Chukas v'hizah al ha'ohel. This defies the normal rule that something which is mechuber l'karka is not mekabel tumah. This is a special din for certain materials which are mechuber l'karka. Those materials are the ones which were used for the layers of the urios on top of the Mishkan. If we look at the Mishkan, the bottom urea was urea made out of wool. The second urea was urea made out of the hair of goats, in other words, sock. And the third urea, the one on top, was the one made out of hides, skins from the tachash and the rams. Therefore, those materials, wool, sock, and oil, have a special din, that they have a shem oil. And therefore, if you mechaber it lekarka, because the pasuk says v'hizah al ha'ohel, they are mekabel tumah even while being mechuber lekarka, and that's another way that oil can be metame apart from kibbul and medris. This rule does not apply to the first two of cheres and eitz. Then the Mishnah is carrying on. Moisav olav hasok, shu metame mishum orig. A woven, call it a cloth, a woven sackcloth made from the hairs of Ezim can be mekabel tumah in 4 ways. Let's go through them again. If you make a kli kibbul, normal rule. If it's a piece of sock, we'll see later on the shear of 4 by 4 tfachim, it can be mekabel tumah mishum medris. If it's mechuber l'karka and forms an oil, it's mekabel tumah because the rule of tumas oilim the same way as oil, because sock was one of the layers of the ureas on top of the Mishkan. The 4th way is b'tamim mishum orig, even if it's none of the above, i.e. it's not a kli kibbul, it hasn't got the shear which is royal and medris. We're not talking about an oil. If it's something which is woven and complete, it's a kli sholem, a small belt which has been woven, made out of sackcloth, then that shem sok, that shem orig, this form, this complete, call it a garment, kli made out of sackcloth, which is finished, formed and woven for a function, it's got a tumah on its own right mishum sok. The 5th one is moisav olav habeged, shu metame mishum shalosh al shalosh. This is where everything comes into place. But let's go through it again. A cloth, fabric. If you make it, if it's a kli kibbul, a bag out of cloth, is mekabel tumah. A flat piece of cloth, which is not a kli kibbul, if it's got the shear of 3 tfachim by 3 tfachim, we'll see later on, it's a shear from medris, it is assumed to be roy the mishkav of Moshev and is mekabel tumas medris. If it's stuck to the ground and forms an oil, then under the rules of the ureas of the Mishkan, it's mekabel tumas oilim. 4th way, if you weave a beged, and it is a complete beged, woven, even though it's got hasn't got a shear of oil and medris, etc., it's not tumas medris or a kli kibbul, it's metame mishum orig because it's a complete woven article. And then we have the special 5th one which applies only to fabric, soft fabric of beged. Most of all of our beged should metame mishum sholosh al sholosh. We've had before flat pieces of leather, flat pieces of sock, flat pieces of beged are always considered to be royal and medris if they have a certain shear. The shear we said was, for a piece of leather it's got to be 5 tfachim by 5 tfachim. For a piece of sock, 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim. For a piece of fabric, 3 tfachim by 3 tfachim. That is so, but they are then royal tame tumas medris. However, with beged we have another shear. Even if it's much smaller, even if you haven't got 3 tfachim by 3 tfachim, and it's not royal medris, you've just got a piece of fabric Sholosh al sholosh means 3 etzbois by 3 etzbois. Whenever we want to use 3 tvachim by 3 tvachim, it's shloisha al shloisha tvachim. But for etzbois, which is much smaller, the breadths of 3 fingers by 3 fingers, tiny piece of cloth. 3 finger breadths by 3 finger breadths. Then it's not royal yeshiva. You can't sit on such a small piece of cloth. And it's not a kli kibbel. It's not a finished object called an orig. However, this piece of cloth is mekabel tumah. Not an ava tumah. It's mekabel tumah. If a sheretz were to touch it, it becomes a rishon, the tumah, under the special rule of beged sholosh al sholosh. If it's shlosh al shloisha, then it's got a din tumah's medris. It can become an ava tumah if a zov sits on it. If it's only 3 etzbois by 3 etzbois, it's got a sheer beged for kabbalas tumah from an ava tumah in order to make it a rishon. So that's all the stages in this Mishnah, and we're going to be dealing with a lot of these dinim, especially the beged ones, as we go through the perek.